Hello, hi, and namaskara. My name is Kirtan and I am a second year medical student studying in a government medical college. In this video, we will be talking about the reflex regulation of the blood pressure and the long term regulation of the blood pressure. So, under the reflex regulation of blood pressure, we will be talking about the three important reflex that are baroreceptor reflex, chemoreceptor reflex, and the CNS Systemic Response. And in the long-term regulation, we will be talking about the renal mechanism and the hormonal mechanism which induces the long-term mechanism. So let's start from the reflex regulation of the blood pressure. So before starting, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe for more interesting physiology videos like this. So in the reflex regulation of blood pressure, the first one is the baroreceptor reflex. It is also called as the cyanoaortic reflex. So this reflex acts within few seconds, and is one of the reflex which acts first and immediately after there is a rapid change in the blood pressure. So in any reflex, there should be the receptor which knows the change in the blood pressure. So these receptors in the baroreceptor reflex are nothing but the baroreceptors, as the name of the reflex. So these baroreceptors can again be divided into high pressure baroreceptors and low pressure baroreceptors. They differ from the site where the pressure is more or less. The high pressure baroreceptors is present in the blood vessels where high pressure is present, like in aortic arch and carotid sinus. So these high pressure baroreceptors are the main receptors acting in the baroreceptor reflex. So these are the receptors which activate the baroreceptor reflex. These are present in the aortic arch and the carotid sinus mainly. So what are the afferent pathways? So the afferent pathways are from the carotid sinus. The information is taken and transmitted to the center in the brain by the ninth cranial nerve. That is nothing but the glossopharyngeal nerve, and the afferent pathway from the aortic arch receptor, it is carried by the 10th cranial nerve, that is again the vagus nerve. So these are the afferent pathways. So these afferent pathways go and end into the centers. These centers are present in the medulla. So these centers are nothing but the vasomotor center. I talked about these centers of the medulla and the actions of these centers in my previous video, that is the part 1 of this regulation of blood pressure. You can watch that video for understanding it better. The centers are vasomotor center and inhibitory center. So as the name suggests, the vasomotor center stimulates and increases the blood pressure, and the inhibitory center decreases the blood pressure. It increases the blood pressure through the sympathetic nerves, and this inhibitory center decreases the blood pressure from the vagus nerve. So therefore the afferent pathways are, so from the vasomotor center, sympathetic nerves. So these sympathetic nerves supplies blood vessels, heart and adrenal medulla, therefore resulting in constriction of the blood vessels, increase in the heart rate and the release of catecholamines from the adrenal medulla. Whereas from the cardioinhibitory center, the vagus nerve or the parasympathetic nerves are the afferent pathways. This vagus nerve, mainly from the NTS region, that is nucleus tractus solitarius region of the cardioinhibitory center, supplies only the heart, and results in the decrease in the heart rate, that is nothing but the bradycardia. So these are the afferent pathways. So next is, what is the response seen? How does this act? So the response is of two types depending upon if the blood pressure is increased or the blood pressure is decreased. So we'll see in the case of if the blood pressure is increased. So if BP or blood pressure is increased, how does this act? How does this reflex act? So when there is increase in the BP, there is stretch of carotid sinus or the aortic arch, which has the baroreceptors. So these contain the baroreceptors and stimulates the baroreceptors. So when the baroreceptors are stimulated, the afferent pathways connect it to the centers. From the afferent pathways, the center is stimulated. So in this case, the blood pressure is increased. So the cardioinhibitory center is stimulated. So when cardioinhibitory center is stimulated, the vagus nerve is activated. And the vasomotor center is inhibited. So this vasomotor center is inhibited by the interneurons from the cardioinhibitory center. So the cardioinhibitory center controls the vasomotor center from the local interneurons, which inhibits the vasomotor center. So due to the vagus nerve is activated, the heart rate decreases. And due to the vasomotor center, due to its inhibition, the heart rate decreases. There is vasodilation. So due to this all, finally, so due to the heart rate decrease, the cardiac output decreases, and due to the vasodilation, the BP is directly decreased. So this is the flow chart in the case of if the blood pressure is increased. So if the blood pressure was decreased, you can write the same, but there is change in the here. Vagus nerve is deactivated here and the vasomotor center is activated here. So you can change the respective points here and write the flow chart during the exam. So this flow chart is neatly given in the book, that is the GK Pal. It is the standard book for the physiology. So the next physiological significance of the baroreceptor reflex. So this baroreceptor reflex is the immediate reflex in the body. So it is the first and foremost reflex. And acts immediately. So in cases of acute hypotension, so this acute hypotension may occur in cases like long standing. So when there is long standing, the blood accumulates in the venous pools in the leg. So there is decrease in the cardiac output, and therefore there is acute hypotension. So in the case of acute hypotension, the baroreceptor acts immediately acts and increases the increases the BP. So it is important in day-to-day life activities. That is the baroreceptor reflex. So the second physiological significance is this baroreceptor reflex. It has a specific. The second physiological significance of the baroreceptor reflex is the baroreceptor reflex functions in the wide range of the change in the blood pressure. So the blood pressure, if it's 50 to 200 mmHg, so in this range of the pressure change, the baroreceptor functions. So if there is wide fluctuation of the blood pressure also, the baroreceptor acts. So the third physiological significance is it proves the Mary's law. Mary's law. What is the Mary's law? So Mary's law is heart rate is inversely proportional to the blood pressure, and not vice versa. So what does this mean? So heart rate is inversely proportional to the blood pressure. So when there is change in the blood pressure, the heart rate is always inversely proportional. So if there is increase in the blood pressure, there will be decrease in the heart rate due to the baroreceptor reflex. So when there is increase in the blood pressure, as you seen here, the heart rate always decreases. So when there is decrease in the blood pressure, the heart rate increases, again due to the baroreceptor reflex. But it's not vice versa. So when the heart rate increases, it is not mandatory that the blood pressure also decreases. So only the heart rate is inversely proportional to the blood pressure according to the Mary's law, and this baroreceptor reflex proves it. So these are the physiological significance of the baroreceptor reflex. So the next reflex, important reflex, is the chemoreceptor reflex. So the chemoreceptor reflex, it also has the receptors for this, and the receptors are chemoreceptors. Again, the name of the reflex, chemoreceptors. These are again present in the same sites, carotid bodies and the aortic bodies. So chemoreceptor reflex acts when there is chemical change, that is during hypoxia, that is decrease in the oxygen concentration, hypercapnia, that is increase in the carbon dioxide concentration, and during acidosis, that is decrease in the pH of the blood. So during these cases, the chemoreceptor reflex acts. So what are the afferents for this? So the afferents are also same as the baroreceptor reflex here. So the carotid bodies, the afferents are 9th cranial, and the aortic bodies, the afferents are, you must know that it's 10th cranial. The centers are the cardiorespiratory centers. There are two types of centers in this reflex: cardiorespiratory centers and also the medullary centers, that is vasomotor center and the cardioinhibitory center, both. So the both are activated simultaneously in this reflex. So these are the centers for the chemoreceptor reflex. What is the effect? So this effect is again divided into primary and secondary effect in the chemoreceptor reflex. So in the primary effect, so when there is, take a case of hypoxia. So when there is hypoxia, the cardiorespiratory centers, the vasomotor center and the cardioinhibitory centers are activated. So due to the activation of both simultaneously, so this is primary effect. So due to the activation of both simultaneously, there is bradycardia and vasoconstriction. So this occurs both simultaneously. This is due to the cardioinhibitory center activation, and this is due to the vasomotor center activation. In the secondary effect, due to the hypoxia, there is pulmonary hyperventilation. This pulmonary hyperventilation causes the adrenal medulla to release catecholamines. So this release of the catecholamines increases the heart rate. So this increases the heart rate, and therefore the total effect of this both primary and secondary effect, it is mild tachycardia and vasoconstriction. So there is slight increase in the BP in the case of hypoxia. So this is the chemoreceptor reflex. There is one more important point, that the chemoreceptor reflex acts if the blood pressure fluctuates between 40 to 70 mmHg. So this regulates the blood pressure only in a small range of blood pressure fluctuation, whereas the baroreceptor reflex, it regulates in a wide range of fluctuation of the blood pressure. Now let's talk about the next reflex, that is the CNS Systemic Response. So it is the third important reflex in the regulation of the blood pressure. So it is also called as the Cushing reflex. So what happens in the CNS ischemic response? So during increase in the intracranial pressure, there is decreased blood flow to the vital organs, that is nothing but the brain, heart. So when there is a decreased blood flow to the vital organs, there is also decreased blood flow to vasomotor center. So due to the decreased blood flow to the vasomotor center, it causes hypoxia and hypercapnia in the vasomotor center. So this leads to intense stimulation of vasomotor center. So because there should be adequate blood flow to the vital organs for the good functioning of the body. So due to the intense stimulation of the vasomotor center, there will be increased and rapid vasoconstriction. Increased and rapid vasoconstriction. So due to the increased vasoconstriction, there is again reflex bradycardia. So this CNS ischemic response is always seen with a reflex bradycardia. So how does bradycardia occurs due to this? So when there is increased vasoconstriction, there will be increased pressure in baroreceptors. So the baroreceptor reflex acts in this case. So due to the increased pressure in the baroreceptor, this causes reflex bradycardia. So therefore, whenever there is an Cushing reflex, it is always observed with the reflex bradycardia. So again, let's revise this flowchart. So during the increased rise in the intracranial pressure, there will be decreased blood flow to the vital organs, especially to the vasomotor center. So this causes hypoxia and hypercapnia in the vasomotor center, and there is intense stimulation of it. So due to this, there is vasoconstriction and the pressure in the baroreceptors also increases. So therefore, there is reflex bradycardia. So this CNS ischemic response is very useful in the cases of the acute shock or the chronic shock cases. So this acts when the pressure falls down, acts when pressure falls down below 40 mmHg. So this is the last response and the last reflex seen in the case of the decrease in the blood pressure. So now, after completion of the reflex regulation, now let's talk about the long-term regulation of the blood pressure. So the long-term regulation of the blood pressure, as I mentioned in my first part of this video, it is mediated mainly by the renal mechanism and the hormonal mechanism. So the renal mechanism, the kidney regulates the BP or the blood pressure by increasing or decreasing the water excretion and the salt excretion. So whenever there is increase in the pressure, the kidney directly increases the water excretion. So due to the increase in the water excretion, the blood volume decreases, due to which the cardiac output decreases, and therefore the blood pressure ultimately decreases during the increased case of blood pressure. And it happens the same when there is decreased blood pressure. So this is an intrinsic factor of the kidney. So the kidney, it is already automatically does this regulation of the blood pressure. It is intrinsic to the kidney. So the increase in the water excretion, it's called as the pressure diuresis, and increase in the salt excretion is called the pressure natriuresis. So this is the graph of when the diuresis increases due to the increase in the arterial pressure. So you can see from when the arterial pressure ranges between the 120 to 180, there is a steep rise. So this steep rise occurs between the pressure 120 to the 180 mmHg. So this is one of the clinical significance in the case of the renal mechanism. The next mechanism in the long-term regulation of blood pressure is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So about this two, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system and the antidiuretic hormone, I have already talked in my first part of this video. So this RAS or the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system increases the blood pressure by increased vasoconstriction and increased BP due to the water reabsorption. So due to vasoconstriction and water reabsorption, the BP increases in the case of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So in the antidiuretic hormone also, the similar happens. There is increased vasoconstriction and increased water reabsorption. So antidiuretic, it helps in water reabsorption, not in water excretion. Antidiuretic. So the next hormone is the atrial natriuretic peptide. It is released by the atrial myocytes or the atrial cardiac cells. This helps in decreasing the blood pressure by increasing the water excretion. So by increasing the water excretion, the cardiac output decreases due to the decrease in the blood volume, and therefore the blood pressure also decreases. So this is the hormone which decreases the blood pressure, whereas this too increases the blood pressure. So in this video we talked about the reflex regulation, that are the Bioreceptor Reflex, which is the first and foremost and the immediate reflex which acts between 50 to 200 mmHg of the blood pressure fluctuation. And also we talked about the Chemoreceptor Reflex, which acts when there is change in the chemical change in the blood, that is hypoxia, hypercapnia and the acidosis. And we also talked about the CNS Systemic Response, that how it affects the blood flow to the vital organs, and also it leads to the reflex bradycardia. We also talked about the long-term regulation of the blood pressure. In that we talked about renal mechanism, how the kidney regulates the BP, and also about the hormonal mechanism. So that's it for this video. I hope you understood this video, and if you found this video informative, please like, share and comment, and also don't forget to subscribe. I'll provide the notes for this video in my Telegram channel. You can join the Telegram channel for the notes. I'll put that link below in the description. So thank you.